Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Quote of the day: life is not about having everything, it's about finding meaning in everything. Assalamu alaikum. Today, the topic of my presentation is McNemar's statistics under kind supervision of Professor Dr. Saira Afzal. Learning outline of my presentation is about introduction about McNemar test and their difference from chi-square test, how we calculate it, and different version of McNemar test, recent updates, and at the end, there is an MCQ session. Learning outcome. In the end of this presentation, participants will be able to describe about McNemar test, calculation, different version, and the recent updates. This is a table in which there is shown the different categories of test and which data is required for a different test. These all are basically a non-parametric test. The categorical data is used in all tests, and the categorical data is divided into two types, unpaired and a paired data. And when a paired data is represented in a two sets to be compared, then we use McNemar chi-square test. And when the paired data is in the form of more than two sets to be compared, then we use Cochrane's Q test. And in the unpaired data, if more than two groups to be compared, then a chi-square test is used. And if two groups to be compared, then we use chi-square or a Fisher exact test. For a nominal variable in the form of a 2 into 2 table, basically three types of statistical test can be used. The first one is Fisher exact test. The precondition for its use are binary data and unpaired sample. The second one is the McNemar test, which requires binary data as in Fisher exact, but in a paired sample. The third one is the chi-square test, requiring a sample size of more than 60 subjects with more than 5 counts in each cell. The chi-square test can also be useful for a contingency table of more than 2 into 2, 3 into 3, and 4 into 4, and so on. Let's introduce over today's topic, which is McNemar test. McNemar test is a statistical test used on paired nominal data. It is applied to 2 into 2 contingency table with a dichotomous trait with match pair of a subject to determine whether the row, column, marginal frequencies are equal. It is named after the Queen McNemar, which introduced this test in 1947. The McNemar test is used to determine if there are differences on a dichotomous dependent variable between two related groups. It can be considered to be similar to the pair sample t-test, but for a dichotomous rather than a continuous dependent variable. In paired sample t-test, there is a continuous dependent variable, and in a McNemar test, this is a dichotomous pair which is used. When data are paired and the outcome of interest is a proportion, the McNemar test is used to evaluate the hypothesis. It is also called the McNemar chi-square test because the test stats has a chi-square distribution. The McNemar test is only used for paired nominal data. Chi-square is used when nominal data are collected from independent groups. This is the McNemar chi-square distribution. The sampling distribution of a McNemar stat is a chi-square distribution. The McNemar test is always done on a 2 into 2 table with the degree of freedom 1. For example, if a test with a critical value for a McNemar test is 3.84, The null hypothesis is not rejected if the McNemar test stat result gives the value less than 3.84. But the null hypothesis is rejected if the McNemar stats give the value which is more than 3.84. 3.84 is a critical value on 1 degree of freedom. This is 2 into 2 table. How we represent this 2 into 2 table, and this is the formula of McNemar test which is used in the calculation, and you can see that in the calculation we can only use discordant pair B and C. These two are discordant pair and A and D are concordant pair. So in the McNemar stats we use the discordant pair B minus C under root 2 and divided by B plus C. Now we propose the hypothesis for the McNemar test. The null hypothesis of marginal homogeneity states that the two marginal probabilities for each outcome are the same. A PA equals to plus PB equals to PA plus PC, or PC plus PD equals to PB plus PD. Thus, the null and the alternate hypothesis are. Because McNemar test is based on the information only in the discordant pair B and C, the calculation of exact p-value is quite simple. If the null hypothesis is true, then it implies that B and C should be equal. And the cells are just count of people, so the underlying distribution has to be binomial where 1 by 2 of the count should be in each cell. So this is over null hypothesis when PB equals to PC, and this is over alternate hypothesis when these discordant cells are not equal. This is the example. Below is the data from 334 women with a breast cancer. Screen film mammogram detected 136 women. Digital mammogram detected 138, but only 84 of these women are detected by both modalities. The data are displayed in the 2 into 2 table like this. In 2 into 2 table, we use two type of a test, chi-square or a McNemar test. But we want to see if the proportion of a detected woman differs between the modality. It might be tempting to use the simply chi-square test for this contingency table, but that would be wrong because that test is built to examine the assumption that the rows and column are independent, and in this scenario they are clearly not independent because they are depend on each other because the same women are in both groups. So we use McNemar test in this calculation. And when we put all these value in a calculator which is used for the calculation, then the value McNemar chi-square is 3.44 and the p-value of chi-square is 0.06. And there is an other version of a McNemar test which is called exact p-value, and the p-value is 0.0697. There are different versions of McNemar test. Edward proposed the following continuity corrected version of the McNemar test to approximate the binomial exact p-value. And this is the corrected version of this test, and in this formula is used for calculating the p-value, which is also called binomial exact p-value. If either B or C is less than 25, then chi-square is not well approximated by the chi-square distribution. Then we use exact binomial test that can be used where B is compared to a binomial distribution with a size parameter. The exact binomial test evaluates the imbalance in the discordant B and C. And if we achieve a two-sided p-value, then we multiply over p-value with the 2, then we get the two-sided p-value. This is the formula which is used for a exact p-value calculation. In this example, this is shown how we put the value in an exact p-value. For example, in the subgroup of a woman less than 50 years old, 72 of these women had breast cancer, and in this 2 into 2 table, B equals to 17 and C is equal to 7. So we can use these two values, 17 and 7. So in the formula, our total number is 24. If we plus 17 plus 7, then our sample size is 24. Theta is 1 into half. This is the formula in which we put all these values and our answer is 0.03. And if we get the two-sided p-value, then we multiply this 0.03 with 2 and the answer is 0.06. And in the previous scenario, you can see that the calculator gives the exact McNemar p-value, which is 0.06, and we can calculate this value, exact p-value, also by this formula. There is an other version of McNemar test which is called mid-p McNemar test or mid-p binomial test. It is calculated by subtracting half of the probability of the observed B from the exact one-sided p-value, then double it to obtain the two-sided mid-p value. And the formula of the mid-p value is exact p-value and subtracting it from the half-sided p-value. The original McNemar test was most powerful but often slightly liberal. The mid-p version was also almost as powerful as the asymptomatic McNemar test and was not found to exceed the nominal significance level. It should be noted that if the sum of discordant pair is smaller than 25, and the total sample size is large, the statistical power of the McNemar test is low. Thus, in research studies with small sample size and the sum of the discordant pair is less than 25, then there is different version of McNemar test which is used, like exact binomial test can be used. Alternatively, adverse continuity correction is another option. Nevertheless, the use of an exact test in studies with few subjects will produce unnecessary large p-values with poor power. So this is the reason when we use the different versions of McNemar test, which is exact p-value or a mid p-value or the adverse continuity. Then over recent updates session, this is one of the article which is commonly used statistical test and their application. The same is true for discrete data in that there are certain assumptions that need to be satisfied to identify the correct statistical test to use in comparing the data group. In this paper, their discussion will be focused on 9 commonly used statistical tests. These common tests include t-test, pair t-test, analysis of variance, Wilcoxon rank sum test, Wilcoxon sign rank test, and the non-parametric ANOVA chi-square test, Fisher exact test, and the McNemar test. The condition for the use of these tests will be described and application therefore will be discussed. Therefore, the purpose of this paper is not to describe the mathematical theories behind different statistical tests, but to introduce the test and their application. So this is one of the another article in which they interpret the effective use of the McNemar test. When analyzing paired binomial data using 2 into 2 contingency table, either the McNemar test or the chi-square test could be applied, but the application of the latter is more common. But the McNemar test is frequently more appropriate. The null hypothesis of the chi-square test is that the two categorical variables being tested are independent. In contrast, The null hypothesis of the McNemar test is the marginal homogeneity in that the row and column marginal frequencies are equal. As these hypotheses test different questions, selecting the appropriate test is paramount for the accurate analysis. This is the another article. The heading of this article, McNemar test revisited, comparing the sensitivity and specificity of diagnostic examination. The novel examination and reference standard results are usually presented in the form of 2x2 table, which allows the calculation of sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. It has been recommended that the measure of statistical uncertainty should be reported, such as the 95% confidence interval when evaluating the accuracy of diagnostic examination. Comparing the difference in sensitivity or specificity of a normal examination with the reference standard is important when evaluating its usefulness. The McNemar test used to compare the discordance of two dichotomous response and can be applied for this purpose. However, applying the McNemar test to 2x2 table for comparing the accuracy of examination is not recommended, since this test is sensitive to proportion of positive versus negative. Moreover, if the novel examination has higher sensitivity than one considered as the reference standard. So, in order to compare sensitivity and specificity between examination, this table is inappropriate and an independent reference standard is necessary. In this article, we propose the use of McNemar test to compare sensitivity between examination. Now it's time for the MCQ session. Researcher wants to find out which of two methods of dressing wounds are more effective at preventing infection. 70 rabbits are each given two similar wounds which are dressed with two methods. For each rabbit, it is recorded whether each wound has an infection or not. Choose the most appropriate procedure to decide if the method of dressing wound has an effect on whether there is infection. A. Chi-square test for independence, pair t-test, unpaired t-test, linear regression, or McNemar test.
E. McNemar test.
E is the right answer, McNemar test, because population is same, rabbit, and they are dependent on each other. Researchers were interested in care of head trauma patient while in hospital. From the hospital record, they recorded information about 400 patients across several hospitals. Some of the information they recorded was whether the patient's brain injury was on the left or right side or both, and also whether they develop an infection while in hospital. Choose the most appropriate procedure to decide if the location of the brain injury has any effect on whether the patient develop an infection while in hospital. A. Chi-square test for independence, pair t-test, unpaired t-test, linear regression, or a McNemar test.
A. Alpha chi-square test.
Alpha is the right answer, chi-square test for independence. So basically, I will give 4 scenarios of these type, which will differentiate between all these tests: McNemar, chi-square, linear regression, pair, or unpaired. In a particular study, 20 participants were each sent to 2 rooms for interview. Before one interview, they were asked that they assume closed poses such as crossed arm and hunched shoulder. Before the other, they were asked assume open poses such as hand behind the head or feet on the table. The concentration of the stress hormone cortisol was measured for each patient after each interview. Choose the most appropriate procedure to decide if there is a relationship between posture and cortisol concentration. A. Chi-square test. B. Pair t-test. C. Unpaired t-test, linear regression, or a McNemar test?
Paired t-test B.
B is the right answer, paired t-test. In a weight loss program, 40 participants were randomized to two groups. One group were instructed to eat lunch before 2 p.m. and the other group were instructed to have lunch after that time. At the end of the program, the percentage weight loss for each patient was recorded. Choose the most appropriate procedure to decide if there is a relationship between the time of days a person eats lunch and their percentage weight loss. Chi-square test for independence, paired t-test, unpaired t-test, linear regression, or a McNemar test.
C.
Alpha chi-square test for independence.
C, C unpaired t-test is the right answer.
But Naila, there is a percentage weight loss. In t-test, there is a mean. In percentage, we always consider the chi-square test for independence. If there is a mean, then you should tell about the paired or because t-test is always
Dr.
based
Hansa,
upon.
we will discuss it after the class. Please let her present first.
Mm.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Khansa. 5. McNemar test could be used to compare the number of cigarette smoker among cancer cases, age, and sex-matched healthy controls, to examine the change in respiratory symptom prevalence in a group of asthmatic from winter to summer, to look at the relationship between cigarette smoking and respiratory symptoms in a group of asthmatics, to examine the change in PEFR in a group of asthmatic from winter to summer, to compare the number of cigarette smoker among a group of cancer cases and a random sample of the general population.
C.
A is the right answer. To compare the number of cigarette smoker among cancer cases, age and sex match healthy control. So these all are from the same population and we put it into the 2 into 2 table and they are dependent on each other. There are many versions of McNemar test. Edward proposed the following continuity corrected version of the McNemar test to approximate the binomial exact p-value. Which of the formula used for the calculation of Edward continuity? A, B, C, D, or E?
C.
B.
C is the right answer.
C.
2 into 2 contingency table for the analysis of chi-square and a McNemar test. How we differentiate that which test is applied? Paired nominal data, paired ordinal data, unpaired nominal data, unpaired ordinal data, or a categorical data.
Paired nominal data, alpha.
Alpha is the right answer, paired nominal data. 2 into 2 table which is used in multiple statistical tests and there are two types of pair in a table. Which type of pair used in the McNemar test? Concordant pair, discordant pair, unicordant, bicordant, or a multicordant pair?
Beta discordant.
B is the right
B.
answer. Discordant pair. Yes, B is the right answer. There are multiple sampling distribution used in different statistical tests. Which type of distribution used in a McNemar test? Chi-square distribution, binomial distribution, normal distribution curve, bimodal distribution, unimodal distribution.
Beta binomial distribution.
Alpha.
Alpha.
Chi-square distribution, alpha. A comparison of clinically diagnosed versus autopsy confirmed gastric and peptic ulcer was performed on 750 consecutive diseases patient in several large hospitals as shown in the following table. From these data, if we calculate the McNemar test, then which is the right answer? 6.1, 7.1, 7.5, 8.1, and 8.5. So here is the solution. This is the formula which is used 200 minus 150 under root 2 and 200 plus 150, so 50. When we take square root, the answer is 2500 and divided by 350, so we get 7.1. This is the key of my MCQs, YouTube link of my presentation, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Khansa. Would you please close the recording? Oh, would you please close the recording?
Yes, ma'am.